Great. Hey, everybody. I am Jon Taylor. I'm a therapist located outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And I work primarily with folks who are struggling with sex addiction, their partners, and more and more couples who are in addiction recovery. And that's the kind of work that I really like. And that's what this webinar is for. We take a look every week at skills that we learn in individual recovery that help make our relationships better. So the skill we're going to talk about today, I will reveal the name for it a little bit later on, but first, kind of a warm-up. I want to gather some ideas. So I want you to reflect on this statement here and share some of your thoughts in the chat feature. So write a few words you would use to describe the kind of relationship that you would want to turn to when you're upset, scared, feeling playful, excited, or otherwise vulnerable. So write a few words to describe the kind of relationship that you would want to turn to when you're vulnerable. And
you can send it to just all panelists. That would, be, or you can send it to the group. It doesn't matter, but
there we go. So let's get some thoughts rolling in there. Is there a way? I don't think there's a way for me to see the chat while this is.
Yes, scroll your mouse at the bottom and it should show, I think. Otherwise I can read them to you, but.
It's not showing up.
Oh, you know why? Because I have two screens so I can see things both ways. Sorry.
Okay.
So.
Are we getting anything in the chat right now?
So far safe.
Okay.
Yeah, but otherwise, so if you've just joined us, Jon is sharing his screen, and if in the chat, you can send them to all panelists. But if you have any thoughts on what kind of a relationship you would turn to, if you were upset, scared, feeling playful, excited, or otherwise vulnerable, please share that. We'd love to hear from you.
This type of relationship is one of the main measurements we look at, or I look at when I'm working with couples, and whether or not their relationship is a working relationship or whether it can be working. We call this quality the ability to turn towards versus turning away in the relationship. And thus far, a lot of the skills, a lot of the aspects of relationship we've talked about, these are skills or aspects that you can work on asymmetrically, meaning your partner doesn't need to be working on it at the same time in order for the relationship to improve. This is one of those that if this is worked on in an asymmetrical way, it actually leads to more hurt for the person who is turning towards versus turning away. And it can lead to more overwhelm for the person who's not turning into the relationship. So this is one of these that the ability to turn toward a relationship, it feeds the relationship and helps the relationship grow if both parties are committed to doing this and if both parties are doing this.
And you're not talking about just a romantic relationship. You're talking about any kind of relationship.
Yeah. And to prove that point, think back to a time where you, maybe at work, maybe at school as a child, as a teenager, you identified someone that you really wanted to get to know and you really wanted to develop a positive relationship with, and you reached out to them and they pretended like you didn't exist, or they didn't acknowledge the reach at all. Remember how that felt. So this isn't just romantic relationships. In any relationship, if we're trying to build it strong, it really makes a difference the way that we turn toward each other and the things that we turn toward each other on. So in a relationship where turning toward happens, this is a relationship where needs are responded to and needs are accepted. Somebody put in there, they would describe the relationship as a relationship where I could openly share my feelings without worrying about being judged or met with defensiveness. And I think that's right on too. That's the feeling that gives us the confidence to take whatever's going on with us to this other person. As I mentioned in the prompt here, this isn't just the serious stuff we turn towards each other on, because when turning towards each other works really, really well, it's that we see our emotions mirrored in the person that we have a relationship with. We see them tracking with us. So when we're excited, they're excited. When we're sad, we can see that it affects them in a similar way. So it's really about that flexibility around vulnerability. and that vulnerability is so much a part of the relationship that we don't have to hesitate too much, or we don't have to hedge our bets in going into that relationship in a vulnerable way. So this is a part of a relationship that when there is active betrayal going on, or there's unprocessed betrayal or unprocessed hurts, it's really hard to get this turning towards working, because there's a big piece of us viscerally that's saying, I'm not safe to do this. Or on the receiver's end, if our partner only turns towards us when they need something, and that's what the history has taught us, or if our partner turns towards us and wants this very specific response, and they don't really want our authenticity or our genuineness, then it's going to be nigh impossible for us to kind of break out of that and turn towards this way of being in the relationship where we're at ease when our partner approaches us. So the ability to do this and the ability to work on this, there really has to be a foundation of safety in the relationship. And that safety and trust being built is what corrects that asymmetry that may have existed in the relationship before. So let's say that, you're the person who's more prone to reach out with excitement, or reach out with affection, or reach out with interest, and you tend to get shut down. When safety and trust are built, we're able to, our partner who tends to shut us down is able to acknowledge that they do that. They're able to acknowledge that they don't meet us the way that we need them to, and we're able to see some changes in that. So it's not just this like, oh, you're so needy. It's this, I recognize this is really valid for you. This is really important for you. I want to work on that because I want to be that kind of a partner for you. I want you to come to me. I know I've got some openness to work on. So the way that we start to get this turning toward working in a relationship is we really have to slow down the relationship interaction and make sure that we're being heard, and make sure that we're being understood, and make sure that we're communicating clearly. So for me, one of the ways that I see people work on this in recovery, and it really primes them to do this really well in relationships later on, I take people who are involved in 12-step fellowships, for example, and a big part of that is writing down inventories, long conversations, and sharing those inventories with a trusted other person like a sponsor. And that sponsor's job in hearing those inventories is to hear them compassionately and fairly, and to give you direct and loving feedback on that. And that is almost the exact process I follow with couples when I want to get this turning toward thing going. There's a speaker and there's a listener, and the speaker's job is to share openly and honestly their feelings, thoughts, behaviors, perceptions. The listener's job is to provide an experience of that person being heard, that person being understood. So the listener will ask really good follow-up questions. They're not looking to fix anything. They're not looking to move past this. It's just this, I'll sit here with you in this. And in therapy, I think for a lot of folks who are new to recovery, that's what therapy starts to provide them too, is an opportunity to share openly and honestly, and to have the experience of being deeply listened to. And in my opinion, there are few things that a therapist can do that are as effective as listening deeply and empathetically. There's few things you can do outside of that make big changes in the way that listening does. So this is a skill that people in recovery experience in and out all the time, especially when their recovery is working and they feel safe and connected in their recovery. And taking it back to your relationships that matter can sometimes be, sometimes it's as simple as educating our partner on what we need from them, what we want from them. Hey, when I come to you in that playful way, what I really need you to do is I need you to respond in a way that's not dismissive. I need you to accept that, because that shows me that you're open to me. So sometimes it's as simple as just diving in and changing the way we interact. Sometimes there can be some parts of our history that are so entrenched that made this so unsafe for us, that those parts of our history need to be known and processed together. So again, this is where I see that recovery correlation. Sometimes recovery can be as simple as, I need to change my behavior because this is hurting my relationships, and because of my commitment to my relationships, I can do that. And other times there may be a trauma or there may be a difficulty that until we process that and have a different way of thinking and feeling about it, we're stuck in it. And so in our relationships, it's a lot the same way. So again, that willingness from both of us to be educated and to educate each other on what we need when we reach from each other is what starts to get this, what really starts to get this working for us. I'm going to put up another question, and I'd be interested in some response on that. Share some brief thoughts about what you think makes this kind of relationship possible. So some of the comments before about this kind of relationship, there was the safety, not being judged, it feels secure. What do you think makes a relationship have those qualities? Safety, security, no judgment, very low defensiveness. Share some thoughts in the chat. Somebody said, when each are willing to be vulnerable rather than defensive. Somebody said trust. And those are both right on. And I think with both of those, there's a decision involved. We run into this myth, or I run into this myth a lot with couples when it comes to them having difficulty turning towards each other. And it's this myth that says, if you really loved me, then you would know that I needed you to respond in this way. You would just know it. I wouldn't have to tell you. And both vulnerability and trust are built on taking a risk, being very explicit about what our needs are, and very explicit about how we expect or how we want the other to show up for us. So trust can't be built without that vulnerability. Trust can't be built without that directness. That willingness to be vulnerable for every couple I work with, it's almost like we could pinpoint this decision point where they said, I'm not going to be defensive with you anymore. I'm just going to start telling you the truth, because my connection to you is more important to me than me not feeling shame or me not feeling fear. I want to be connected to you more than I want to avoid those emotions. Somebody else said it's taking time to really listen and empathize. I had an interesting conversation this weekend with one of my son's dads. They invited us over for dinner, and he and I are in very different yet similar fields. He does advertising for a construction company. And so we have these philosophical discussions every now and then. And he said, do you think that it's really important that everybody knows how everybody else feels about everything? And I said, well, maybe not to that degree, but I do think knowing other people's experiences and backgrounds is good for relationships. And it helps us to be more tolerant and more loving with each other. And that's a piece that I think recovery brings a breath of fresh air to a lot of people. In the society we live in and the way we relate now, we're not used to empathetic listening. We're not used to really being heard. We're not used to really having conversations, and our relationships suffer for that. So that's another really fundamental way that these kind of relationships are built. It's vulnerable sharing, actual listening, actual disclosing. Somebody said calm, open, loving communication without accusations or finger pointing. And that's absolutely right too. When it comes to listening to somebody and making sure they're heard, that is not the same as agreeing with them. You can deeply listen to somebody that you fundamentally disagree with, and they can feel heard at the end of that. So it's not rejoining with, but you have to understand, or you've got this wrong. It makes sense to me that you would feel that way because I just listened to your narrative. I've been here with you, and I can see where these feelings got put together for you. So some takeaways for turning towards versus turning away. Again, this is a relationship where there's already a foundation of safety and trust, or we're working in that direction. We both agreed to work in that direction. And it's also a relationship where there's some willingness to do things in a different way. So when we're turning towards somebody, we're coming to them with our vulnerable needs that we would like to be responded to. And oftentimes we're giving them very clear instructions about how we would like to be responded to, what we need from them in this situation. And then we give them a chance to show up in that way, or show up in the best way that they know how. it's often something we have to educate each other on what our needs are, how we're likely to respond, and it takes a lot of processing some past hurts in a relationship where this has not been the norm. We often have to process some of those past hurts. We have to take some of those inventories and share some of those inventories with each other in order to be able to do this. So that's what I've got on turning towards today.
There are a bunch of things there. I was thinking about too. Big crisis, I'm sure. But you kept talking about we and the communication, and it's so scary sometimes. It's like, can I trust that if I tell you this, that you aren't going to just smack it down and and I'll feel hurt and go, why did I even bother? So it does take some little foundation things to probably build. Okay, I'm going to take a bigger risk with it. So, I kept thinking, though, it's incremental. And if I did this and we have some success, or if we do this and it didn't really work out, but I'm able to come back and go, I may not have said it as accurately as I needed to, or I've rethought about it. And this is, this would be more helpful, that type of thing.
I really appreciate that clarifying, because trust is built incrementally. It's built in increments that are, it's enough of a movement that we feel a stretch, but it's not so much of a movement that we're completely blown out by fear or completely blown out by anxiety. And trust is really built on those increments for the reasons that you just said. Thank you for clarifying that.
And there has to be, and I use a lot of what you share. And I think about across relationships, it isn't just with my significant other, it's with, other friendships and family and everything else. So, there's always this kind of like gauging where the safety level is and how much I can do, but I think I've gotten better at, I'll still misstep and put too much. I'm the one that'll put too much faith in somebody or trust in somebody. And then, I had a situation and it kind of happened again. And I was like, I just have to remember that people are human. And if I don't clearly articulate things, and even if I do, sometimes they're going, it's not going to work out, and that's going to have to be okay. But I kept thinking, but I don't want to close down and try to be an island unto myself. So I understood that there's going to be risk. I will be hurt, but ultimately, payoff, is when this goes well, I'm more connected to people. And, so what we're talking about is, turning towards, I want to be, toward other people rather than always away from everyone. So, but finding the right people and building those skills, because my picker was really off when we first got into recovery.
Well, and even if your picker's not off, this is a relationship skill that I would say you want to hold on to, as I could see this as being a possibility with many more people than I ever thought. But this is not one of those things that you lead with everybody. Because you can totally get blown out of the water with that vulnerability hangover or picking the wrong person to do this. This is one of those that you definitely want to choose the right relationship at the right time and the right level of risk to practice this one, because it does require so much vulnerability, honesty, authenticity, transparency from us to do this in a way that can actually be met in a meaningful way. You could go and, share with somebody something that they think is really vulnerable, but when it's not for you, the loving, the care, and the attention that you get back from them isn't going to count for much, because that what they're giving that to wasn't real. It's kind of that belief in addiction. If you knew me for who I really was, you would reject me. So this requires that we tell a lot of truth about ourselves, and that's not something that we want to give away to everybody. We definitely want to be picky with that. But when we are picky and we do invest in the right relationships at the right time in the right way, it's incredibly rewarding, because then you end up with that relationship, like that initial prompt, you end up with that relationship where it's like, whether I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm lonely, I'm excited, I'm happy, I have someone to share that with. And I know they're going to want to hear it from me, because we have this long track record of this is what we bring to each other. This is what we give to each other.
Yeah, I agree. So any thoughts, questions? It doesn't have to just be on turning towards. So if you have any relationship questions or comments, would love to hear from you. Otherwise, it's just John and I talking. So,
Which is always enjoyable,
I was
Tammy.
going to say thank you. I was going to say I do too. So, but it's funny because in Dr. Rob's live Q&A tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time, but it's interesting how many times I refer back to some of the webinars that you've done because there's such practical skills.
Mhm.
It's like if I try this, and this, I should be able to make progress in this particular area. And, rather than, I find that things that are not broken down for me, it's like, I don't know how to get from this point to this point, but you're giving, here's how I can build this.
That's what I love about what recovery gave me in my relationships is it demystified them and took them out of this, like, it's just some magical thing that happens for everybody else but me. And really, I think what close relationships are, it's a set of skills between two people. And it's a commitment to using those skills over and over again, with the right people that gets those close relationships. Especially in sexual addiction, we tend to really glorify and fantasize, and they call it the cosmic lover fantasy. The right person at the right time is going to fix everything for me. Relationships are just really hard work. And they're skills applied over and over in the context of commitment and love and like and tolerance and all of that kind of stuff.
So there's a comment, this is the most difficult thing for me because I'm so full of fear.
And I would look at that fear, and with this skill, I don't think fear is a misplaced feeling. Fear is an emotion that tells us that there's great risk, and there's great risk of us being hurt. And I don't know of any time, like still to this day, anytime I turn towards my spouse in a vulnerable way, there's always fear there. Because there's a chance in the 8-10 hours a day that we're away from each other working that something changed. And I may not come back home to the same person. Now that fear doesn't sit in front of my face because knowing my spouse the way I do, I think that's very unlikely, but it always sits there is that, this piece of me you may not have room for right now. So fear is not always an inappropriate emotion. I think with this skill, it's really about deciding to face the fear and incorporate the fear into the relationship versus taking that fear as a signal that I'm going to shut it all off and I'll never ever try this again. There's some moments where, I can tell even with someone who's close to me, now's not the time for me to share vulnerably. This person's not in a good place to receive it. And that doesn't mean that they're always in that bad place. It's just because I watch this person and I'm attuned to them, I can know that now's not the place. And that fear that comes up is a really important slow that down signal. And that's one of my hopes for my clients that I work with who are really, really scared around relationships and paralyzed by fear. I don't want them to throw the fear out and to just become this, all relationships all the time are good. I think actually where the fear runs rampant is we don't listen to it carefully. So we think it's speaking about every situation all the time versus some of these really specific things we might be picking up on, a lack of safety, a lack of trust. We might be picking up on what I have to share is more risk than this relationship is built to handle right now. So, maybe this isn't the relationship I take that risk in. That's where I really love the role that supportive people can play in our recovery, whether it's someone from your group, your therapist, sponsor, a fellow traveler, something like that. Those are people who the risk of getting it wrong in those relationships is relatively low because those people showed up as volunteers. They showed up as people who don't need anything from you and are willing to give a lot. So taking risks in those kinds of relationships can help build some of our tolerance and build some of our skill base for that. So this person who wrote in, I hope that you have some people you can process some of that fear with and some safe volunteers, a therapist, a sponsor, support people that you can practice some of this with, so that fear can take its proper place instead of running the show all the time.
For me too, I actually would say, what's the worst that can happen? And I would identify. So if I was afraid, what, they could reject me. How would that feel? What would that actually look like? And is it survivable for me? It was like, and I was like, okay, so then I'd be willing to do that. And, almost never did I have the very worst thing happen, you know? So,
Yeah.
so then I was like, okay, so I survived those things. And, you know, most of the time it actually, you know, and I would also actually do and the best thing that could happen is this person would
Yep.
hear me, you know, you further our relationship, whatever it was. But I really kind of did that. Identify what what my worst fear, what my worst expectation was. You know, they'd hate me. Well, you know, I'm not supposed to be liked by everybody, whatever. I mean, whatever. And I had support around that too. But what's the best thing that could happen? And I would go, okay, now is the risk worth it? And most of the time it was. But I think it was just because I articulated, you know, part of the fear that helped me not be frozen by it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the time, the feeling of fear is rational. The degree to which we may feel it may not be. And so that kind of talking yourself through. And again, to this person who put this in, I haven't seen your name come up in here before. So if this is your first taste of this and you're feeling like, oh, I can't do any of these, go back and watch some of the previous ones. Because like I said at the beginning, this is a really heavy hitting kind of advanced skill. You may not be able to take it out of the gate. This may be one of those that's like, there's some work for me to come in the future. But go back and watch some of the previous ones, because there is a lot that's accessible. Even if you're brand new to recovery and brand new to sobriety, my belief is you don't have to wait until you're sober and you've got your life put together personally to start having really great relationships. In fact, I think one of the ways that we get our lives put together personally is to have great relationships that support us in that hard work. So don't get so overwhelmed that you stop looking at the relationship piece. This is not where you would start.
Well, and I think it's like, but on this relationship, I'm closer to this person, so I might be at a different level than this relationship. Yeah. So I was talking to somebody, I was emailing with somebody, and I suggested the one about negotiation, and this person said, we're not there yet. And I said, I understand, but I said, you know, even if the two of you look at this, it may be something that you take some nuggets from and go, this is something we can work towards. But having that framework is different than the framework that you might be in now. So I agree, it may be something that we're not ready for now, but it's something that if I at least have it on my radar, I can work towards it and have it as a goal that I want to work towards.
Yeah, definitely.
Other questions or comments? Somebody asked me a really interesting, I'm trying to think of what it was. There was a really interesting question, and I was like, oh, please come to one of the webinars and ask that, because it was I can't even think of what it was right now, but otherwise I'd throw it out there. But
do you get a lot of people who reach out to you outside of these? And
yes, I spend a fair amount of my day answering emails and calls that are reaching out about, and trying to connect. So if you're out there, Tammy at seekingintegrity.com. And I do my best to try to offer, to connect you with resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There are a number, and we're adding more, not just this webinar, but, Dr. Rob has a live Q&A tonight at 5. Dr. David has one at 5 on Wednesday. And then there's one in Spanish, and then there's drop-in groups for addicts and partners. And, so there's just a variety of supportive resources. The podcast, we have 2 different podcast series. Rob and David are each doing one, and so those are connected on sexandrelationshiphealing.com too. So a lot of times I'm pointing them towards that. Or, we do have treatment for men, with sex addiction, intimacy disorders, or co-occurring sex addiction and chemical dependency. So, there's more information on seekingintegrity.com, about that. So I'm answering those, but a lot of people, kind of pour their hearts out and are looking for, the right fit for, help and support to find that. So
such a good resource.
Thanks. So there, I've done group for years and have counselors, which I've done many times in the past. I actually came clean with my counselor 2 weeks ago and realized that even in a safe environment, I always have a limit of vulnerability that I'm trying to break through. I'm really proud of you for being able to identify that. That's huge progress right there.
That's huge. What that process is it's reorienting to what's around you rather than what's inside of you. Without that ability to go back and forth, the narrative in us never changes, and our perception of what's around us therefore never changes. So this is a common thing I see in the folks that I work with. Is there were enough relationships that were meaningful enough for long enough that weren't safe, that they've just gone on autopilot, that nobody's safe ever. So I don't ever tell anybody the truth. I don't ever come to them vulnerably. And oftentimes, folks that I work with will find themselves in these settings where they're like, I don't know why I keep doing this. I know that I have some safe relationships now that I can turn to. I know I have some people that I can trust. It's that internal programming. So the ability to come clean, that comes from this starting to like venture a peek around again and say, wait a minute, like, am I understanding this correctly? And I hope you keep doing that. I hope you keep observing these relationships that you've come clean with, and you kind of force yourself out of that self-imposed isolation. And I'll say to men in groups that I work with, when I see them kind of pulling back, I'll say, look around the room and find a friendly face or two. And there's always friendly faces. And there was one guy who said to me, I take that everywhere that I go now, just to remind myself that there are friendly people out there, even if they don't know me. He's like, I look for friendly faces at the grocery store. And he said, there's always a friendly face at the grocery store. And that's the beginning of a big reorientation for you, to say, I can choose trust over mistrust. I can choose connection over disconnection. So I hope you keep doing that. I hope you keep using that, and I hope it keeps paying off.
I tell people, Seeking Integrity is a sex addiction and intimacy disorder treatment program. I said, there might be someone out there that struggles with addiction that doesn't have an intimacy disorder. I don't know them yet, because, I think that that's such a huge issue. Sex addiction, you can have sex without intimacy. There's lots of people doing that. That's the problem. So it's one of those things where and intimacy isn't sex. It's, about the connection and everything else. So I hear in this comment that someone's making strides at working through the intimacy disorder. Clearly, if you're here, there's relationship stuff going on, and perhaps sex addiction, but the intimacy disorder, you're making some progress there. So,
yeah.
Other questions, comments? We have time. So can you share with us what next week's topic is? Do you remember?
Yeah, I can look it up really quick. I'll have to actually look it up.
Oh, it's okay. So this person shares, that's exactly where I'm at. I've learned to be alone no matter who I allow into my circle. I was married for several decades, and I really never was able to be truly vulnerable. My addiction is definitely an intimacy disorder. I've always focused on sexual sobriety rather than intimacy. We talk about this a lot with our treatment stuff too, is like, abstinence. A lot of times in sexual sobriety, people will say, I've been sober 9 years, and that means I haven't had sex, I haven't been intimate with anybody, I haven't connected in 9 years. That's not the point, So the point is being able to make healthy attachments with people, and your friends and, colleagues, whatever, the friendly face at the grocery store, but connecting with other human beings, and learning to be able to attach in a healthy way to other people. So,
yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, active challenging we have to do to those old narratives. It reminds me. So yesterday we had been home from our vacation for a couple of days, and it was definitely time to come home. My kids were at each other's throats. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and my 6-year-old, one of his favorite comebacks is learn your physics. He fancies himself this science aficionado. So like when he thinks you're full of crap, so you don't know what you're talking about, learn your physics, even if it has nothing to do with physics. So he's going head to head with his 9-year-old brother. And of course, everything the 6-year-old saying is just full of holes and like nonsense. And so I see my 9-year-old puff up and he's about to open his mouth, and I pause him and I just whisper in his ear, I said, "Is what you're about to say necessary?" And he says, "Well, it's true." And I said, "Is it necessary? Like, does your brother need to hear this from me right now?" And he's like, "I guess not." And he dropped it and they moved on to something else. And I think that that vulnerability limit, there was a time in your life where I would guess that that was necessary, and maybe even a lot of areas of your life it's necessary now. But I think it would do a lot of good, for everybody to challenge some of those set narratives over and over again. Is this necessary in this situation? Do I need to be doing this in this situation? And that's where we find those opportunities that we wouldn't see otherwise. So, I wish you the best of luck in your continued healing. I did look at the top. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think ultimately look at your goal. Is it to be connected with people? And then what are the steps I'm going to have to take in order to get from where I am right now to that spot? And you're starting to take, some steps towards that, which is, like I said, great. But, I think it's kind of like, if I can visualize that this is the place I want to get to, and you can get to there and then go, okay, that I made it. Now I'm going to reset the goal. But I think having that, rather than, like you said too, you're challenging the narrative. So, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck in this spot that I'm at. And if it's working for you, great, but it doesn't sound like it. So it sounds like, you want to progress. So, there will be change necessary in order to get there.
Well, that's a great setup for our topic next week. We're going to talk about the role that satisfaction plays. Specifically around satisfaction with sex and romance, but we'll talk about it in general terms as well. And that's really, I think, in recovery, there's a lot of like, I could do this, I could stand this, it's not so bad. But for me, a recovery that stops at like, well, I'm not miserable is, we've only unlocked like a quarter of the potential of recovery. When it really gets into what do I want, what would make me happy, what would make me satisfied, and then, like you said, Tammy, what am I willing to do to get there? Because very rarely, if we already had the ability or we already had the know-how to get where we wanted to go, we would have gotten there. So often we have to ask ourselves that question: what am I willing to do this? And it often requires us to break out into large amounts of discomfort, but discomfort for a purpose. I'm doing this because I want the kind of relationship that's connected. I'm doing this because I want the experience of being seen and valued for who I am, not for who this person thinks I am.
Yeah. And for me, I was willing to do things because I didn't want to be comfortable in my discomfort. Because I wasn't happy, to your point, I wasn't happy. It wasn't really working for me. It was known. So there was the comfort of the known, but but there was also the uncomfort of this isn't what I really want. So, so then you're caught in this like in between stuff, and it's, which probably helped me just kind of propel, I was like, okay, I'm willing to take a little step forward. So,
yeah.
Any other questions? Comments? Yeah. Oh, we got one in the queue. I discovered my fiance's sex addiction around a month ago, and he is even more distant than before and showing symptoms of depression. His addiction seems more around intimacy and connection. Also doesn't want me to help him and would rather terminate the relationship. Is it too early to make that decision? I want to help him, but I need help myself first.
That last sentence, I think that's your big orientation there is, in order to help somebody, there's a few factors that we want to look at when help is effective. So first is the state we need to be in to be able to help. When we're hurt, when we're scared, when we're angry, when we're overwhelmed, we don't tend to be in a place to be able to give the best that we're capable of giving. And to me, for partners of addicts, that's my plea to them is, you are probably very good at helping, and you probably know this person very well and could help them very effectively. And you're going to do that best from a position of stability. You're going to do that best when, some of your anger and your hurt and your sadness has been able to be processed just a little bit. So you're on firmer ground. And I would encourage you to go there first. so you can give the kind of help that you want to give. The second things to look at is the timing of the help that we give. There's two times when it's really effective to give help to another person, and that's one, when it's early enough in the process or early enough in the behavior that it hasn't become entrenched or an addiction, or when that person will make the changes they need to make regardless of whether we help them or not. That's when our help is effective. And it's it breaks my heart to hear this, that he's pushing rather than accepting, because I can tell from what you're writing that you're really willing to help, and that this isn't necessarily a deal breaker for you. I think that the first year at least of recovery is too soon to tell how things are going to go, or too soon to tell, am I better off in this or am I better off out of this? And I wish that there was a flip we could switch in the human nervous system that says, just take all that anxiety and put it aside for a little while, and you're going to work on yourself and your recovery for a year, and you're going to come back and see how big that anxiety is. I wish we could flip that switch and people could just put those big relationship decisions on ice for a while, because a lot changes. A lot can change. Unfortunately, though, sometimes the shame that a person in addiction recovery feels will outweigh anything else that they want, and they may move into a reflex that's more about protecting themselves from shame and protecting themselves from further exposure, and oftentimes it comes at the cost of the relationship. There's a really good resource, I think, Dr. Rob's book Prodependence, and the resources around there are really good for stuff like this. There's also the book I've recommended here before, Getting Your Loved One Sober, that talks about this, whether or not your partner wants help from you, how you can organize yourself and your approach to that relationship that can end up being helpful for them. This is one of those places where we don't necessarily need symmetry in the relationship in order for the help to be given, or in order for the help to be effective. So this may not take a willing partner, but definitely learning by getting the help for yourself and stabilizing yourself first, and then learning some of these skills and these approaches that can help you keep a connection with someone who may be overwhelmed with shame. Help you to keep the door, help you to keep the door open in a way that eventually they can see that the door is open. Because right after discovery is some of the most shame-prone times I see in addicts. And I would say probably 80-90% of the people that I worked with right after a big discovery, they'll talk about, maybe I'm better off with divorce. I wish we never had to talk about this again. And that often changes. But it's a difficult place to talk somebody out of that. So I hope your fiance is getting help and support too. And that may be a really loving way that you could help right now, is say, hey, I don't want you to feel this way, and I don't want you to feel like you need to be cut off. There's really good people out there who would love to help you and who would give you a lot of love in this, and you might refer them to sex and relationship healing for further help there, and hope that they pick it up, because I hope they do.
Yeah, yes, I agree with everything Jon just said too, and I'm glad that you're reaching out for support. Prodependence is super helpful information, and we have Prodependence betrayed partner drop-in groups. So where you can go talk to other people who have been and are experiencing this as well. And there's a moderator who keeps the meeting safe. So it's one of those. It is a safe place for you to go. There's also drop-in groups for him, and the webinars are like this. That either of you are able to join in on. The depression, honestly, that is so typical early on. Some people are clinically depressed, and they do need a psychiatric evaluation. But the depression of the acknowledgement of oh no, I need to not keep doing this, but I don't know how to live without my addiction. I mean, it's a really difficult place to be, in that in between. And I think, especially early on, like Jon said too, you don't have enough skills, you don't have enough tools to be able to, recovery gives you all of those, but it's a process and it takes time. So,
yeah.
So it's kind of managing that process. One of the things, and I'm not trying to just promote seeking integrity, but one of the things I think is great about that is it's 14 days and they get a whole bunch of information and they get a foundation of recovery that could take, on a weekly basis of going to see a qualified therapist. And I say qualified for a reason, because there's a lot of therapists that aren't qualified to work with us. They may be qualified to work with other things, but this is specific. But working with a qualified therapist like Jon, it could take a lot longer period of time, and then both of you are still in that in between. So it's one of those things where it does take time. You're not alone. There's a lot of help and support. So reach out. There's lifelines, for both of you.
Yeah.
What were the books? So you mentioned getting your
loved one sober.
I'll put it in the chat.
So there's that book, and then there's also Prodependence by Dr. Rob. Both of those have some good group options, like Tammy mentioned. Prodependence has the drop-in groups for betrayed spouses. And if my understanding is correct, there's more and more therapists who are getting trained in that prodependence model and offering resources there.
They are reaching out, and it's not just for sex addiction. I mean, that's really for anybody who's dealing with a loved one who's struggling, whether it's mental illness or it's alcoholism, whatever it is. If you're the loved one of someone who's struggling, you may be dealing with family and friends that are going, oh, just dump that person, do whatever, and you're going, no, I see the good. I really love this person. And you're getting all these messages that are less than supportive, or they've gone to, I think, well-meaning therapists that are saying you're part of the problem. And let's look at your family of origin and talk about your whatever. And again, you're trying to keep the house from burning down. And they're talking about, I mean, it just doesn't resonate. And for many partners, it ends up being more traumatic. They're going, I went for help and support, and now, I'm being told I'm the problem, and I didn't do any of this behavior. So that's challenging.
So that's what I really like about the prodependence approach, is it doesn't have that at all in it, that you're part of the problem. Also, that Getting Your Loved One Sober book, I was introduced to that through a group for friends and family members of addicts through Smart Recovery. So it's Smart Friends and Family, or Smart Family and Friends. If you Google that, Smart Recovery Family and Friends, you can find support groups that are very focused around what you're talking about here, which is, number one, getting the help for yourself, and number two, knowing the best way to help your loved one who's struggling. And so in both of those groups, whether it's a prodependency group or one of those SMART groups, the focus is not about cutting and running, or you're married to or you're with an awful person, so it's never going to work out. The focus is around maintaining supportive relationships with the people that you love, who are struggling with addiction, which I think is it's better for everybody involved in the vast majority of cases.
Didn't you say with the Getting Your Loved One Sober that there were, I think I remember you sharing this before, that there are some things that you may not want to do because it was So when that book was written for folks who specifically have addiction to alcohol or drugs. So they mentioned one of the premises of that approach is you want to make sober life as attractive as possible. So you may plan things that your addicted partner really loves and invite them to participate in that rather than drinking or using drugs. When it comes to sex addiction, that can get problematic. So they would talk about planning a romantic date night as an alternative to your partner drinking. That kind of stuff, take that with a grain of salt or not at all, because when it comes to sexual addiction and sexual betrayal, you do not need to be the replacement for your partner's addiction. You don't need to make yourself any more attractive, any more desirable. So there's some of the approaches in there that are not updated for sex addiction. Maybe that can be part of my life's work, is getting that written for the partners of sex addicts. There you go.
But a lot of the other things they talk about, like the timing of when you give help, how to set and maintain good boundaries, how to communicate about your feelings without getting wrapped up in a big fight. That's all really, really applicable.
Okay, so any other questions or comments for today? as always, we thank you for joining us and asking questions and sharing your comments. It really makes it more interesting. Jon, thank you again for more relationship skills that we can apply to our various relationships. Continue to learn and grow.
Yeah, I love doing it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today.
And so join us. So there are other options. So join those during the week, but otherwise join us again here, same time, same place next week.
Back.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.